Go.
But
All right, we have turned on the recorder at this point. So welcome back after our Christmas hiatus or holiday hiatus, I guess, because it was New Year's, Hanukkah, and other things as well. I'm glad that we've gotten started again here in January, and I'm especially glad that Tom has volunteered to be the first one out, and we have 3 more presenters scheduled for February, March, and April at this point. So, Tom's presentation will indeed be about Josephine Baker, and I won't spoil anything by telling you how neat a person she turned out to be. What I will do, as we have in the past, is I will mute everybody, and Tom, you'll have to unmute yourself to be able to have us hear you. So without further ado, let's get rolling.
Thank you, Ken, and welcome everybody. Delighted to see a great group of French philatophiles. And I'm going to be talking today about Josephine Baker, a fantastic person, certainly one of the luminaries of the 20th century. My presentation will include a fair amount of philatelic material and postcards, but then I have some other ephemera to go along with it. One thing I do want to warn you about is that the microphone on my computer gets a little wonky for some reason when I am sharing a PowerPoint. So you might find that the volume of my voice goes up and down, and I tested it with Ken, and we think it will be sufficiently audible. But I look forward to answering questions later, and let me introduce you to the life of Josephine Baker. Best known as a performing artist, but also recognized as a military hero of France from the period of World War II. Josephine was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Her birth name was Frida Josephine McDonald, born in 1906. And this is a market view of St. Louis in 1906. At the age of 15, she married a man named William Howard Baker, and in 1921, shortly after marrying him, left him and went to New York. In St. Louis, she had been a street performer as a child and was looking for other opportunities, bigger opportunities to perform at that time, principally as a dancer. When she got there, it turned out that at the age of 15, she was too young to appear in productions on Broadway, but not too young for touring shows. And the first one that she appeared in was a revue called Shuffle Along, which took to the road and then came back to Broadway. The circle in the middle shows where she was in the chorus line. And then she later appeared in a musical called Chocolate Dandies. Now, as you might guess from the titles of these are shows that cater principally to African-American audiences. And by today's standards, we would say that they were stereotyped. Well, she met a couple of people, Americans, who were back in the U.S. from France, and was enticed to leave New York and go to Paris, which she did at the age of 19. And this was a time when, Paris, it was the Roaring 20s. There were shows, everywhere. And you might might notice, if I can point that out to you right here, is a poster for the 1925 Paris Decorative Arts Exposition, which is another one of my collecting interests. Well, she very quickly became a star, and her signature role early on in Paris was in the Danse Sauvage at the Folies Bergère. And the banana skirt, and by the way, these are not real bananas. They were, as you see here, they were artificial bananas. And this is a little bit more demure image of her. Mostly she performed topless. And this was really certainly one of the iconic images of her, which appeared in the upper left of the Josephine Baker commemorative semi-postal stamp that was issued by France in 1994. Well, when they were planning the 1931 Exposition Coloniale, she was suggested to be the so-called queen of the exposition. By that time, she really had already become world famous. And in the postcard here, we see her at the Pernod Pavilion with a huge crowd. But there were objections raised to her having this lead role in the exposition, one of which she was still an American citizen. She was not a colonial. And because she plastered her hair down, as someone said, like a flapper, they criticized her for not having natural hair. So the intent of having her as the queen of the exposition, that never materialized. But she also began to appear in film, and there are three films in particular for which she's best known. La Sirène de Tropique was a 1927 film starring her. Zuzu in 1935 was a talking film, and by that time she began to develop her vocal talent. The third film for which she is well known is Princess Tam Tam from 1935, and in 2008, when the U.S. issued a series of stamps honoring vintage black cinema, they chose the image of the movie poster for Princess Tam Tam for this maximum card. In addition to reviews, stage shows, and movies, Josephine Baker also appeared in an opera, or an operetta rather, a La Creole by Offenbach. She starred in the title role, performed the Théâtre Marigny in 1934. The theater is shown right here in the lower right. Well, in 1935, she was enticed to come back to the U.S. By that time, her fame had spread worldwide. She had performed many places throughout Europe, and she was invited to be a star together with Fanny Brice, the star, in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1936. And as you can see, Bob Hope was in this also. The picture of Baker here, it's not quite the banana skirt, but it was a costume that was a little more stylized, or maybe a lot more stylized, almost space-like. This did not go well. She had arrived in New York in late 1935 on the ship Berengaria. Performance in the Follies was not well received, and the show itself only ran from late January to early May 1936, which was much less than the intended run of the show. She experienced racial discrimination in some of the many of the reviews made very derogatory comments about her, which were race-based. She had tried to obtain lodging in Midtown Manhattan, but was turned away by hotels there because she was Black. And so she settled briefly in Harlem, and I wish I had been there when she decided that she was going to try out at amateur night at the Apollo Theater. That must have been really quite something. She also opened a nightclub chez Josephine Baker, somewhat similar or patterned after one that she had opened in Paris before coming back to the U.S. But in late 1936, she returned to Paris, sailing on the Normandy. In 1936, also, she had purchased a rundown late 15th century chateau, Les Mélandes, in the Dordogne department. It became a quiet getaway from Paris, where she also had a residence. Okay. There. Well, again, after returning to France in 1937, after the terrible disappointment of her experience in New York, she relinquished her American citizenship and became a French citizen. This was in the time leading up to World War II. She performed in other places in Europe, including Germany and Austria, where she faced a lot of pushback and discrimination from the Nazi influences. Here we have a cigarette card showing her, German cigarette card from around 1941. Well, one of the things that was interesting is she continued during the Phony War and prior to the German invasion, she continued also to perform in Paris. And she was engaged by the 12e Bureau and the Resistance to try to engage in surveillance and spying on behalf of the French, the Free French. And she was rather successful at doing this and had a lot of different ways she would scribble notes on napkins. She had pieces of paper pinned to her lingerie, a lot of different ways that as she chummed up with the Germans, that she was able to get some fairly useful intelligence that she was able to pass on. Because after all, I mean, she's only a showgirl. So after the German invasion, she said, I will not perform in Paris, which is probably a good idea. And she left Paris for Les Mélandes in the unoccupied area of France. And there she harbored members of the Resistance, refugees, and was once interrogated by the Germans. And she just gave them I'm just a performer. I'm just a singer and dancer. And no, I have nothing here. But at that time, there were substantial armaments that were hidden in the chateau. And her contact with the resistance at the time, he was off canoeing in the river nearby, which was really quite fortuitous. So in late 1940, though, she and Resistance leader Jacques Abti were forced to flee France for Morocco. They took a rather circuitous route. They went to Spain. They went to Portugal. They continued to do espionage, then realized that they needed to leave the continent altogether, and were able to went back to Marseille, where she also performed they did a kind of a makeshift production of La Creole, the Offenbach operetta. And soon after that, they spirited away across the Mediterranean and settled in Morocco for the remainder of the war. And during that time, she suffered some very, very serious medical issues, heart attack, stroke, was on death's doorstep several times. But she was quite resilient. And after the war, she hit the stage again. Her health had recovered. And this is a program that I was able to obtain. It's not in the greatest shape, but I think it's fascinating that she was performing in Stuttgart on May 30th, 1945, only 3 weeks after the end of the war in Europe. Her, at that time, husband and musical director, band leader, Joe Bouillon, was the director of the performance there in Stuttgart. And soon after that, they moved back to Le Milan. And in the 1950s, Josephine and Joe began adopting children, a lot of children. In fact, by 1960, they had adopted 12. And the point that she was making was that, we are all one people, and she adopted infants from Asia, from South America, from Africa, from all over Europe. And this is a postcard of Joe and Josephine and the Rainbow Tribe, as they call them, at Le Milan. And recently there was a prepaid postal envelope featuring a cachet of the chateau, and also a mention that it was her home. Her popularity in France just about returned to where it had been before the war. The Rainbow Tribe became an attraction at the chateau, which she opened to the public. The Rainbow Tribe continued to grow, and at the time that the magazine ad for if you've been to Paris, you probably have enjoyed a bottle or two of this carbonated citrus drink, which Perrier had rolled out in 1954. And in this ad, there are actually, if you count the number of people, it's more than 10, but there are only 10 different members of the Rainbow Tribe shown in this. And then in the lower left, a picture of the surviving members of the Rainbow Tribe circa 2005. Well, at the chateau, they established a recette temporaire, a temporary post office with its own postal cancel. And one of my favorite acquisitions is the one with the pictorial postage meter for the chateau, with the slogan, the capital brotherhood, Josephine and Joe are waiting for you, open all year. For her activity during the war, she became a decorated veteran, awarded the Croix de Guerre, and became a Chevalier of Légion d'Honneur. Well, she decided she'd give New York another try, and she returned. And one of the really difficult things that happened was she had been invited to the Stork Club in Manhattan, which was the place to be. The owner wasn't really thrilled about having a black person there in the club. And so when she entered the club, she was greeted cordially, and then all but, as we would often say, seated behind the potted palm tree. So she was seated away from the majority of the people there, and she had a couple of other friends with her, white people, a white couple who belonged to the Stork Club, and the three of them sat, and they sat, and they sat, and people all around them were ordering and were being served their food. Finally, they got a waiter's attention. They ordered, and they sat some more. And finally, the gentleman with her got up and asked the owner, complained to the owner, and later they brought some poorly prepared food. And at that point, the three of them got up and walked out. And this became a cause célèbre because Walter Winchell, the society reporter, was there at the club at the time, and it became really a big public relations mess, not only for the club, but also for her. Well, she came back to the U.S. By invitation in 1963, where she was the sole woman speaker at Martin Luther King's March on Washington. And here we see her wearing her French military medals. She always had been sensitive to racial discrimination, but became increasingly outspoken about it. Well, in 1968, though, with 12 mouths to feed and increasing expenses to the chateau and fewer performance opportunities, she fell on hard times financially and ultimately had to give up the chateau. But and this is a story that may be apocryphal. I'm not sure, because I've seen it in some references and not even mentioned in others, that in the Stork Club incident, supposedly Grace Kelly was there and got up and walked out when Josephine and her friends got up and walked out. So possibly. But anyway, they had become friends, at least during the 1950s. And when she had to leave the chateau, Princess Grace at that time invited her to come to Monaco, where Princess Grace became her patron. And this is the stamp here is one showing Joe and Josephine, but it is, although it commemorates her, it was produced for the Princess Grace Theater that was inaugurated at that time. Well, on into her 60s, she continued to perform on a somewhat limited basis in France and in Monaco. And in honor of the 50th anniversary of her arrival in France, a spectacular review was created starring her and was produced at the Bobino Theater in Paris. And on the left, this is the cover of the program. And then on the right is a poster advertising it. The very sad thing was, after two performances, she had returned on the third night back to her apartment in Paris and lay down amongst a huge amount of press clippings, and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away at the age of 68. So this is her, pictures of her at 68 in one of the costumes from this review. I have a copy of the program from the review, and I suspect that they probably that may be relatively common because the review had been sold out for weeks and weeks in advance, maybe even months. And so they had printed huge numbers of copies of this program, which is probably about a quarter of an inch thick, but only used it on 2 nights. She received a full military funeral at the Church of the Madeleine, and then the funeral procession passed by in the picture at top of the Bobino Theater, which she's still on the marquee, just days after she had performed there for the last time. She received a state funeral in Monaco, where she had lived officially since 1968, and was buried there at the St. Charles Church. And her husband, Joe, who died in 1984, was also buried there later. The picture on the left, you can see at the beginning in the center is Princess Grace. Well, in 2021, the French government began steps to inter her remains in the Pantheon, the place where some of the greatest luminaries and heroes are buried or have been reburied. And the Pantheon has appeared on stamps, postal stationery, spectacular place in Paris. And in anticipation of that, French Post issued a souvenir folder with a set of 4 stamps showing her at different stages in her career, in anticipation of the reinterment of her in the Pantheon. However, her family requested that her remains stay in Monaco. And so instead of interring her in the Pantheon, a casket containing soil from places where she had lived, St. Louis, Paris, Monaco, and Le Malade, was interred there at the Pantheon symbolically. So November 30th, 2021 was the date of the ceremony, which was presided over by President Macron. Now, philately, there really are only the 3 stamp designs. I beg your pardon, 4 stamp designs that have featured her. The best known is the 1994 semi-postal, which was issued both in booklet form and in sheet form. It is difficult to find these with postal uses. There are abundant first day cachets and maximum cards. The envelope at the lower left is one sent from Guyane to France, to mainland France, using her and also one of the other. There was a set of 5 different celebrity stamps issued at that time. The semi-postal booklet had stamps of identical designs to the sheet stamps. And at the top is the opened booklet, and then below that is the cover. Below that is a first day cachet of the entire booklet pane. And then on the right is a single from the booklet pane, which this is about the only way you can distinguish between a sheet stamp and a booklet stamp, is if either it has the booklet pane selvage or if it is a multiple of the Josephine Baker stamp, as would be the case with the sheet stamp. At that time, France issued lots and lots of philatelic documents related to its commemorative stamps. And these are just two examples that were issued officially by the French Post. As I mentioned earlier, the four stamps represented different stages of her life. The upper left, that's the same image that was on the German cigarette card. There she is in her military uniform in the upper right. 1920s performance style in the lower left. And in the lower right, a post-war image. These are all international, as we would call them, forever stamps for the first rate. Well, there are also souvenirs that have been produced related to her. There are two quasi banknotes, both beautifully engraved and printed, but at €0 denominations, one actually showing her and one showing the chateau. Another possible souvenir, and maybe not philatelic, is the 1976 Equatorial Guinea set of roses on stamps. These are not listed in the Scott catalog, although Scott does list a lot of Equatorial Guinea sets at that time. But one of the stamps was named the Josephine Baker. And in preparation for the interment at the Pantheon, a souvenir medal was issued on November 30th, 2021. Well, she had a signature song. This was written for her in the 1930s, and it is called J'ai deux amours, I have two loves. This is a translation of it. I have two loves, my country and Paris. Now, there are differing interpretations of what that means. Initially, my country was the United States. I'll have two loves, the United States and Paris. But some people said that at times they felt that my country, she felt, was not the U.S., but was France. So anyway, but this is sheet music from it. And I want to play a little video for you of her singing it in late 1930s to an audience of French soldiers.
You there, Tom?
I am here, and
Was that the dance mix that we started to hear?
No, that was something entirely different. I am going to stop share and then reshare to pick up the rest of it. Okay, there we go. So that became her signature song really for the rest of her life. You know, any program or recording that you see of her always includes this. And that is the conclusion of my talk about her. But I have a piece of postal history that I acquired recently that I have questions about. If you're ready for that, do we have time? We do.
Of course.
Okay. If it will. Okay.
Remember, when you share a screen, if it's a JPG that comes up somewhere else or a PDF, you have to share that separate screen.
Yes. And I'm going to have to find it in a different file. I apologize for that.
In the meantime, do people have questions so that we can ask them to multitask?
Just to add to that amazing career from Josephine Baker and the fact she was really well loved by the French people, but she was also, I believe, in 1966, so a few years before she passed, she was leading the American delegation to the World Festival of Negro in Dakar in Senegal.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes,
I was not aware of that.
You might find some more stories or material around this. There was a very good documentary made by the Soviet television at the time. That is worth watching if you can find it. I'll try to find it on Google and send you the link.
Interesting. Yeah, she really was quite an international person. Can everybody see this cover? Can anybody see this cover?
We see your list of files.
Yeah, we're just seeing your illustrations you put in the PDF.
Okay. Let me try this again.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay. So this was mailed in 1945 from Brooklyn on November 12th, airmail special delivery to Mrs. Joseph Baker. Now, I unfortunately have not been able to decipher the crossed out address, but apparently it was insufficient postage because it was for the special delivery. So it was held in Brooklyn. The 14-cent Franklin Pierce Prexy stamp was added, and then it was canceled again on November 13th. When it reached France, and again, I would love to know what it says under the scratched out part, but appears to have been forwarded to the Chateau de, instead, it shouldn't be de, it should be le, instead of Milan. Castelnau-Feyrac is correct. for the address, and a French Express special delivery sticker was added to it. Now I will show you the reverse of this, which then gets rather strange. So on the reverse, we see that we're about a year later no, I'm sorry.
No.
This is all 1946. We are several days later. The earliest cancel is the Gare Saint-Lazare, which I believe is the 18th of November.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the Gare d'Austerlitz on the 26th of November. And then we have a Paris Rodez railway cancel on the 27th of November. But that's the end of it. Now, Rodez, of course, is not in the Dordogne. It's a little to the south and east a little bit, but it's not that far. And I bought this on Delcamp as a curiosity because I thought, well, it has some elements of Josephine Baker, fan mail or something like that, but I had no idea. Mm. So I appreciate any thoughts on that.
What was the original cancellation?
In Brooklyn?
Yeah.
Okay, let me pull that up.
It seemed to take a long time to get the postage added.
It was actually the next day.
No, I don't think so. It was the next day.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. So the original mailing date was November also.
Yeah.
Right.
19
November
sorry.
13th. Yeah, that's okay. So we have the November 12th cancel, the machine cancel here. We have the duplex cancel here on November 12th. And then we have the November 13th cancel, which cancels the 14-cent stamp. Another November 14th or November 13th cancel at the far right.
Yep.
But it's kind of a mess, but I really I hope that I can kind of figure out what the the original address writing was. I think at the lower right above Dordogne, I think it does say France.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. It's perhaps a two-word town or city name.
Tom,
There is
Yeah.
a city name to the left of it, to the left of the word France, that's crossed by, I don't know,
Yeah.
Le Wiesel, something like that.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, I think so.
And underneath you have Expeditions, or forwarded, yeah.
Yeah.
The line that's above Chateau de Mirande, that's gonna take a little bit of work to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I suspect that's like the street address or something like that, but I think the city, Le V.I. something.
SE. Visa.
Tom,
Yes,
Ed Grabowski here.
I
There's
had.
a image processing program now available at replaced Retro Reveal, which is called, I believe, Postmark Reveal.
Okay.
And you might process the front of this cover with that. If there are subtle differences between or amongst the black inks on the cover,
Yes.
they might respond differently and give you a little bit of an avenue to deciphering some of the crossed out stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Yeah,
I think it's Postmark Reveal. If you Google that, you'll get the website. It's very easy to use.
Yeah, it does look like different shades of black.
It's a question of the composition of the inks, whether it'll work or not. So
Right. Yeah, it looks like the original was much more intense black.
Mm-hmm.
But we shall see. If I can figure it out, I may send a note into the magazine or beg for more ideas.
I'm just looking at that second line down again, and the problem is the person who deleted did a very good job by doing one horizontal line and then going at intervals to do vertical lines.
Right. Yes.
Reading from left to right, it looks as if we've got the English word "the." And
Okay.
have we got the name of something? It looks like Le Beau Chêne, the beautiful oak tree. Could that be what the French call a lieu-dit, a tiny community? But what comes after that, I don't know.
Right.
Loic might be able to look through those scratchings and see if he can see Le Beau Chêne as well. If it was Chêne, there would be a circumflex accent over it. But with due respect to the sender, they might have ignored the accent.
The word right underneath that postmark on the right looks like in English beautiful.
It does.
Beautiful.
Well, yeah, which is a translation of beau.
Yeah, it looks like it's written first in French
and then in English.
And then in English.
And interestingly enough, Mrs. Joseph Baker looks like it's written in the black ink that was used to cross out the original address.
Ah.
So I'm wondering if it was addressed to the beautiful somebody and they recognized this was Josephine Baker.
Well.
The word that's underneath the postmark after beautiful is, good luck.
Yes.
Huh.
Yep.
It could be Baker, poorly written, but it could be Baker. Maybe.
It's possible.
You gotta love mysteries.
Yes.
Yes. To be continued.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, have fun with that, Tom.
I will.
Yep. Anybody else have anything exciting to talk about this afternoon or a good morning?
I have another comment for Tom. I didn't catch the date on the Normandy cover, but was that date the actual date sailing that she was on, or was that just a random Normandy cover?
No, that was not the one she was on. That was the premiere voyage, in 1930. A few months earlier, or actually in 35, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was not the one. That was just kind of thrown in as an example. I maybe should have just put the stamp in.
Well, no, you could look for one with her sailing on it, and then put both of them in the exhibit.
I'm sure that's easy to find.
Right.
Hey, I'm looking for nonsense all the time. And,
Yeah.
I think we all do.
Can I ask Tom something?
Yeah.
Tom, you chose to show as an example of the 1931 exposition the 1 franc 50 blue stamp, which is known as simply les races because it shows all the races of the colonies.
Right.
Did you deliberately choose that rather than the original 1 franc 50, which
Oh,
is
then the femme fatale.
the femme
Yeah.
fatale? Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I did just because it was more general
yeah.
Ins-
It's just
in-
that
instead of an African theme. Yeah.
yeah. It's just that you hear all these stories about the stamp, the femme fatale stamp, being disapproved of because it was a black person on a French stamp. So I mean, there was racism in France just as there was in the USA. So to some extent, she could have been going from the frying pan into the fire, because she would have met racism in Paris. And that stamp did in fact become known as the Josephine Baker stamp because they felt that it resembled her. But
I had not heard that.
and I
Thank
thought
you.
perhaps you didn't want, but as a question of taste, you omitted the femme fatale stamp, the Josephine Baker stamp, and showed de la Nézier's alternative.
Yeah. And I will say also that, in the 20s and the early 30s, when she, soon after she'd arrived in France, Black performers were in colonials were more like curiosities. They were, accepted as artists, but they're not quite so integrated into French society. So, I mean, there are always going to be certain levels of discrimination, and Paris in the 20s and 30s was really no exception to that, but it was different from what it would have been in the US or, the UK or South Africa or, other parts of the world.
Actually, during your presentation, my wife popped in for about 15 minutes because she's always been fascinated by Josephine Baker. So she was absolutely delighted to pop in.
That's great. Yeah.
Unfortunately, she had something else to do, so she disappeared. But what she reminded me of was this. I can show it to you. A box set. We've got this box set of Josephine Baker recordings.
Oh, really? That's wonderful.
Which I think was issued at the time of the Panthéon. Interment. Yeah. It's only a brief box set. There's 40 tracks on there, but it's wonderful stuff to live to. It's so evocative of the 1930s.
Yeah. I have a couple of 78 RPM recordings of hers, over, I guess probably the oldest one I have maybe is 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can find her on YouTube also.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think at least one of her movies is available on YouTube.
Very good.
Yeah.
Any more comments?
Yeah, I have one more comment. It's Tom, in a certain way, you've made me feel very disappointed. Here's a way out one. I'm old enough to remember that back in and I just checked the dates, back in 1950 to 55, the Stork Club had a weekly program, TV program, where they would interview famous guests. And myself and my family used to watch that regularly. And now I feel very disappointed that we did.
Oh, well, yeah. That was then and this is now. Oh, fascinating. See, those are the kinds of things they should be showing on these old TV shows, the really classic ones from the 50s.
The problem is they didn't have good recording systems. They
Right.
had something called kinescope, which was very, very poor. And when you see examples of it, it's just not very good.
No.
Just one comment, a little bit off topic. I'm an Amazon Kindle reader, and I recently read a book which is quite interesting about World War II, The Storyteller of Casablanca by Fiona Valpy, who is an English writer, novelist, who obviously is a Francophile as well. But the book deals with the immigration of a French couple, one of whom is Jewish, to North Africa, to Morocco in 1940, escaping Paris. And actually, in this novel, Josephine Baker makes a prominent appearance in the novel. Very interesting story. Good nighttime reading.
Oh, good.
If you're interested in the Vichy regime of North Africa and that whole topic prior to the Torch invasion of 1942, it's quite interesting, the book.
Yep. There's a book that was published just last fall called Agent Josephine, and it is all about her role in espionage prior to and during World War II. If you want to read a really good biography of her, there's one called Jazz Cleopatra that I recommend.
All right.
Hey, thanks for coming, everybody.
And before everybody checks out, let me announce that next February 26th, we will have two speakers, Tom Mera, who is joining us today, and Richard Aspness, who is well known for his Indochina interest. Tom had, as part of our show and tell in November, some Vichy stamp uses and during and after World War II. And it was so impressive that I asked him if he would do kind of a half program on that. And the same thing was true for Richard and his Indochina. So the two of them are going to share the time next month, and each of them speak for 20 to 30 minutes, and that will be our program.
Brilliant.
So I will see all of you then, and with any luck, some more folks too. I am going to turn off the recording.